Hey everyone, welcome to the lecture on theories of reality production. So this is the first lecture in part 3 of the course, and this is where we put everything together. So I hope you're ready. This lecture is going to be a little bit different. It's not going to be a sit and listen type of lecture. It's going to be a choose your own adventure. So make sure you have a notebook and something to write with, because you're going to be doing some writing and you're going to be wanting to save that writing and come back to it later because it will be useful at a later time. So get ready to write, and if you're not ready to write, then go away, get your notebook and come back and start over and meet me here. And we'll get ready and go. So we're going to be doing something called free writing, and you're going to start with your first one right now. So here is what free writing is. Free writing is where you get a blank sheet of paper and something to write with. You can do this actually typing as well. You can do free typing as opposed to actually physically writing, although I prefer to physically write. I think your brain works better with pen and paper. So if you have no clear preference, then use pen and paper. And here are the rules. When I say go, you have to start writing. You are not allowed to stop writing until the end of time. And that means that if you don't have anything in your mind that you are ready to say, then you have to write crap, because your pencil or pen has to be moving the entire time. So since we're doing this online, I'm going to have you pause the tape. You need to get yourself a timer of some sort. And you also need to make sure that you are in a place where no one will bother you, so that you can have 10 minutes of uninterrupted time to do this writing exercise. 10 minutes. That's all it takes. So I'm going to give you the question on the next slide. And what I want you to do is get yourself ready, get yourself into a place where you can do this. And then when you see the question, I'm going to read it aloud, and then I'm going to say, get ready, go. So then you pause the tape and you start writing. And you do not stop, no matter what, until the time is up, and that's 10 minutes. And if you're stuck, you write, I'm stuck, I'm stuck, I'm stuck, or just write aspects of the question over and over again. The key is that if your hand is constantly moving, then eventually your brain will catch up to your hand. And so you may write crap for the first couple of minutes, but eventually your brain will catch up to your hand and something in there you will use. You're not going to turn this in. This is a way to get you started. So, are you ready? Here we go. Here's the question. What have you learned about how the self is socially constructed? And by that, I mean, what have you learned in this course so far about how the self, or yourself, is socially constructed? This is basically review from exam 2, because that's what exam 2 was about. So another way of thinking about this question is that you're going to be writing whatever you learned from part 2 of the course that you thought was the most interesting. So I'm going to read the question one more time, and you're going to go. What have you learned in this course about how the self is socially constructed? Okay, ready to free write? Go. Okay, take that, put it aside, shake out your hand, and now we're going to talk about this week's stuff, which is theories of reality production, and the easiest of which is the expected storyline, so I'm going to start with that. This comes from O'Brien's introduction, and what she says is that reality is an expected storyline. Like, that's what reality is. So we use stories to organize our lives and to give our life meaning. So let's see. What have I done today? I got up, I went to physical therapy. I was able to move my arm, so that was really exciting. I got it all the way up over my head, which I can't tell you how good that feels. Then after that, I went to the bird store to play with this new bird. I'm thinking about getting another bird. Please tell me not to get another bird. But he's so cute, and he's so nice to me, and he likes me a lot. And then I came home and I said, oh, I have to record my lecture today. And I sat down, and here I am recording the lecture for you. I just told you a story. It's a story of my life. Maybe I would have forgotten today if I didn't tell that story. Maybe if I were telling it to somebody else and not to you all on this tape, I would have said it a little bit differently. But the key is that my day didn't actually happen that way. I filtered a lot of stuff out in order to tell you that storyline. And what I'm doing is I'm organizing all of the things that happened today into that nice, neat package storyline for you. And now, for the rest of the day, that's what I'm going to remember. So that's O'Brien's point. We use these storylines to organize our lives. And that means if you want to understand how someone constructs reality, then look at how they tell you stories. If you look at how people tell you stories, then you understand how they construct their world. So I did the simplest of ones, which is, what did I do today? But, people can tell stories like, who are you? Or, gosh, what did we just finish doing? What have you learned in this class about how the self is socially constructed? You are telling a story. So you are constructing a reality about how reality is constructed. I'll just let that one sit there for a minute. Anyway, O'Brien's point is that all human interaction is grounded in storylines for what is going on. And what these storylines really are is their underlying theories for making sense of things. So as things happen to us, we're kind of placing it in a storyline. And then when things don't go as expected, well, you might end up with a precarious situation. But another way of saying that is that it's not going along with the expected storyline. So the first question on your study sheet for exam 3 asks, how do people use expected storylines to construct reality? A great way to answer that question is to use everything on this slide in the context of an example. So what kinds of storylines do we use? There's the general ones, like how our lives are supposed to go, how our days are supposed to go. That is a storyline that is expected. So as I move through my life, I am expecting that I am going to, get a job, have some sort of career, make a difference in the world. I keep talking about this. That's because that's an expected storyline that I use to guide my life. So In answer to that question, my suggestion is for you to think of some storylines that you use to guide your life. It's the examples that really help you. Another thing that O'Brien brings up at the beginning is common sense. We've already talked about common sense, actually. Common sense, as she defines it, is what everyone knows. And she's quoting Berger and Luckman, which we are about to talk about. And they call it a shared set of cultural rules for making sense of the world. Like, duh, everyone knows it's common sense that, you make sense of the world this way. You have to say it like this. So the point that Berger and Luckman make about common sense is that people make up these rules. Common sense rules are agreed upon intersubjectively, like Babby said. But then what happens is people forget that they made up those rules. Then common sense becomes just what is. Like, everyone knows, duh, it's like this. And people forget that things could have been a different way. This is what naturalized meaning is. Something is naturalized when it is made to seem as if it is self-evident, just what is. And that's what common sense is. We take it for granted as a way of explaining the world, but in reality, common sense is just one way of explaining the world. There are multiple other ways of constructing our realities. So that is common sense. And it underlies the piece on the conceptual machinery of universe maintenance, which is what I'm going to talk about now. So Berger and Luckman are talking about a symbolic universe. So all of these common sense beliefs that we have, they're not just a random smattering of beliefs, they are connected together. And by the way, if this sounds like webs of meaning to you and conventions of knowing, we are talking about the same thing. The symbolic universe, it's this collection of everything that we know about the world. The point that Berger and Luckman are making is that this symbolic universe is not a self-evident universe. It's the dominant one, the one that people generally believe in. But at the same time, there are also deviant versions of this universe. Why? Because it's not the only way. The dominant symbolic universe is composed of common sense beliefs that are all naturalized meaning. So things could be a different way. And those different ways are the deviant versions that they're talking about. So that means that this dominant symbolic universe doesn't just exist on its own, but people have to put effort forth to maintain it. It doesn't just live on its own, because there are deviant versions that have to be contended with. So Berger and Luckman say that there are two main ways that people maintain this dominant symbolic universe. And that's the conceptual machinery. Conceptual machinery basically means tools, and there's two main tools. One is therapy, and the other is nihilism. So I'm going to talk about them. They use the example of heterosexuality and homosexuality, but as you guys know, I like to talk about aliens. And when I logged on today, Google was telling me that there is going to be definitive life, definitive evidence of life within the next like 20 or 30 years. So I don't know how they're able to predict the future, but that's what the scientists are saying. So, folks, we are not alone, and in our own lifetimes, there's going to be proof that that is the case. But when I was a kid, anyone who thought aliens were real was a weirdo. So, our good friend Trudy, who's waiting for the aliens at the corner of Walk and Don't Walk. Trudy is crazy. So she is a deviant person who believes in a different symbolic universe than the dominant one, and she's given therapy. Specifically, I believe it was shock therapy, because she talked about that. So people who don't believe in the dominant symbolic universe are given therapy to help them believe in the dominant symbolic universe. And hopefully the therapy works. If the therapy doesn't work, then the second tool is nihilism. And that is the reality of the deviant person is denied, deemed not to be serious, not to exist. Their reality is not real. So when Trudy's sitting there saying that she's waiting for the aliens to show up, we were all sitting there laughing going, we know the aliens aren't really going to show up, right? Why? Because we're not taking her seriously. Because her reality is a deviant reality. And if you don't take it seriously, then it's not a serious threat to the dominant symbolic universe. And if that doesn't work, people who are deviant can be labeled less than human. As somebody who's less than human, a monster, their reality is not to be taken seriously either. So there are all sorts of different ways to go about it, but in each case, what you're doing is you're taking that reality and you're defining it out of existence. It's a dream. It's not real. It didn't really happen. Whatever it is. So that is Berger and Luckman. There is a dominant symbolic universe, also known as the official reality, and any unofficial or deviant realities are dealt with by larger society with therapy or nihilism. So, I want you to think about how could this be used to rob minority groups of social power. I talked about crazy people. Berger and Luckman talked about sexuality. There are lots of other examples. And these are, how is it that people who don't toe the line of the dominant symbolic universe are made to seem deviant because their reality is not real, not taken seriously, or there's something wrong with them, they need therapy. So try to come up with some examples. And if you want, this is not an official writing assignment, but it might be a good idea to pause the tape and just think about this. What are some of the ways that therapy and nihilism have been used in your world? Some examples that you can come up with. On your study sheet, that's question 2 and 3. Those are both Berger and Luckman questions. So, explaining what conceptual machineries of universe maintenance are. That's these tools, therapy and nihilism. Different versions of reality. That's the official and unofficial version. So how do we use these terms to maintain official reality? Best explained in the context of an example, which is why I wanted you to take a moment and think of one. So hopefully you'll find this slide helpful for doing questions 2 and 3. Okay, it's time for our second free writing. So you're going to be doing the same thing that you did with the first one. I would get out a fresh sheet of paper for this, and make sure that when you're done, you put the question on the piece of paper and save it, tuck it away somewhere because you'll be using it later. And as a reminder, the rules of free writing are that your pen or pencil has to be moving the entire time. So this time, instead of 10 minutes, I want you to set your timer for 5 minutes, so it's not going to be quite as grueling. When I say go, you are going to pause this recording and set your timer, and for 5 uninterrupted minutes you are going to write, and you do not stop writing. So that means that you don't pick your pencil up and chew on the end of it and look up at the ceiling and think about life. No, 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 no. Your pencil needs to be moving the entire time. So you just write fluffy bunny, fluffy bunny, fluffy bunny over and over again until something else comes out. Okay, so here's the question. What have you learned in this class about how your situations are socially constructed? You may want to start with an example. You may want to start with a particular author, something you remember from exam 2, like, the way we define our situations, or, what happens when situations go wrong. I don't know. It's free writing, so you can write whatever you want, but you must write the entire time. Are you ready? What have you learned about how your situations are socially constructed? Go. Okay, you back? Hopefully that was fun. Now we're going to talk about the breaching assignments, which, by the way, is about how situations are socially constructed. Specifically, social interactions are constructed based on trust. Trust that you are the person that you think you are, that the other person thinks you are. And so even if you don't trust the person, even if it's someone you hate and you're like in the middle of telling them, I can't trust you as far as I can throw you, and I can't throw, there's still trust going on in that social interaction. And that is trust based on the interaction that you're having. Like, for example, the situation is defined such that you're having a fight. What if in the middle of I can't trust you as far, and then you just stop and walk up and give them a big hug and a kiss and say, I love you so much. It'll freak them out, because social interactions are based on trust, that they are going to go a certain way, that there's an expected storyline. So your breaching assignment is all about that storyline, and you should have a little bit of fun with this. So there's a bunch of activities, and it says here listed below, but this is just the directions that I cut and pasted from the assignment. But go on to Blackboard and click on assignments, and then you'll see the breaching assignment. I think it's the first one. It is due on April 14th, so this is the first day that we come back, and that means that you should be doing it right now. So whatever is listed there, I want you to do it, and it's fun stuff like get on an elevator and stand too close to somebody. So you do whatever it says, then you write a one-page, single-spaced, typewritten, analytical summary of what happened. Analytical summary means you tell me what happened, but then you also analyze it using what you've learned in this class. That means that you have to identify the social norm that was breached and then describe the reaction to that breach and relate it to theories of reality production that you've learned in this class. So it's due on April 14th, so I'm looking forward to those. And of course, we will talk about it when you come, but don't forget to do it because I know that you have not seen me in a while. So it's due the first day that we come back. So make sure that you remember to do it. Okay, this is our last real, meaty thing to cover. And the 5 features of reality is on your reading list for next week. So you didn't read it for today, but I'm giving you a little precursor because as far as the readings go, this is the most difficult. And so here is what the 5 features of reality is. Meehan and Wood are making an argument that there are 5 features all reality has. They call them incorrigible features. That means that these features never go away. For some reason, all realities seem to have these 5 features. And Meehan and Wood suggest that this is because we construct reality so that they have these features. And science kind of supports this. I'll explain it in a second, but I'm going to go through them for you. The first one is that reality is reflexive activity. Reflexive means self-referential. So I want you to know what that means. That means that what is explained in terms of what is. A great example of this is the Babby article, where he says what's true is real and what's real is true. They are circular definitions. Something is defined in terms of itself. So it's like a magician, a sleight of hand. You're thinking you're defining what truth and reality is, but you're not. It's just a wild goose chase that never ends. So there are some beliefs that simply cannot be proven wrong because of this reflexive activity. So this is one of the ways that reality is maintained through reflexive definitions. A second way that reality is maintained is we think that it is a coherent body of knowledge. Zerubbabel talked about this, and it has come up numerous times since then. But we like to think that reality is structured and it's organized and it's coherent. And what research shows is that if you give people random information, they will put it together and make it seem as if it's coherent. People like to make sense out of things. People do not like when things don't make sense. And so they will work to make things make sense. And that is creating this coherent body of knowledge. There's also research about, the structures in our brain. And there is a structure in our brain that does exactly that. It takes information and puts it together into a story. And it sifts through things. Sometimes it doesn't exactly reflect what's actually going on. But what it does is it creates a simplified, coherent understanding of the world, also known, by the way, as a storyline. So How do we construct reality? We create this coherent storyline. We use reflexive activity, which means that when needed, we use self-referential definitions or things that just cannot be proven wrong. Third, reality is interactional. Reality is constructed in social interaction. It is dependent on quote unquote ceaseless interactional work. So 3, 4, and 5 really go together because you see how 4 and 5 are true because of 3. Because reality is interactional and it's constantly being reproduced, that means that it's dependent on the people in the interaction playing their part. If somebody doesn't play their part, like for example a breaching experiment, then reality breaks down and it becomes fragile. This is like when the dominant symbolic universe is breached and all of a sudden deviant versions of reality are no longer contained. I love it. It sounds like an outbreak of some sort of disease. But that's a feature of all realities. Because they depend on people doing interactional work, that means that they will always and forever be fragile. Because if an interaction doesn't support reality as it is defined, then that version of reality can be undermined. The breaching experiments, which come from Garfinkel, and I've adapted some of his in your breaching experiment, they're all a really good example of how reality is fragile. And the last of these 5 features is that reality is permeable. This means that whatever the current version of reality is, it can be permeated by another version. Permeable is like a word that means able to pass through. It is the opposite of opaque. You may be wearing semi-permeable contact lenses. That means that liquid can pass through them. So that's what the word means. And in this context, what they mean is that one reality can easily replace another reality. That's how they're using it. So the current version of reality can always be altered and another one take its place. And how does that happen? Through interactional activity. Let me give you a different example. We live in a certain kind of reality here, but some of us are also enlisted as soldiers fighting for our country. And when you're at war, it's a completely different reality. And the idea of what it means to be violent, to kill somebody, is different in wartime and in peacetime, and with civilians and non-civilians, etc. So that's an example of how reality is permeable, in that in one social context, all of these meanings are completely different. And if you go to war and then come home, what actually has to happen is that your reality needs to change. And thank goodness that the Army now realizes this, and they have a pretty significant debriefing that helps people to adjust to the different reality that they're going to be in as civilians. It has dramatically reduced the incidence of post-traumatic stress disorder with soldiers. So anyway, that's a precursor right here, this slide, for the 5 features of reality, which we're going to talk about. This is the most difficult reading, so you get it before, and then we're going to talk about it next week. So you need to know what those 5 features are as examples, but you also need to understand how those 5 features are all ways that we construct reality. Okay, so we're not done yet though. That's our last big work, but one more thing. So we have another free writing exercise for you, and same thing as before, get out a fresh sheet of paper. This is going to be another 5-minute one. And what we're going to be doing now is moving beyond just how reality is socially constructed and thinking about how reality is socially constructed to benefit some people and not other people. And part of this course, as I mentioned before, is about being able to recognize privilege in social interactions. When you are the person that is disadvantaged, it's always easier to see. But when you have a privilege, it's harder to see because people just generally assume, using their reference groups or whatever, that everyone else sees the world the way that they do. So if something is unproblematic for me, I'm just going to assume that it's unproblematic for everybody else unless it's somehow pointed out to me. And we all do this as individuals, but the point of what we're doing now is to see how collectively, as a society, we construct reality in such a way that it benefits some people and not other people. For example, there's this new thing called attention deficit disorder that's been getting a lot of attention, and a lot of kids are heavily medicated in school. One way of looking at that is that these children have a disorder that needs medicating. Another way of looking at that is that our school system is flawed because learning doesn't happen in a chair, and that the best way for children to learn is that they're able to be active and to do stuff rather than just sitting in a chair, reading books and writing stuff. People know that that's not the best way to learn, but that just happens to be how our school system is structured. So which one of those storylines do we go with? Each storyline has a different kind of power structure that is embedded in it. And that's what writing assignment 3 is about. So enough precursor. Let's get to it, because this is the last thing that you have to do. So you're going to write for 5 minutes. I'm going to show you the question. I'm going to read it. And then I'm going to say go. And you're going to go. So here's the question. What have you learned in this class about how reality is defined in such a way as to rob minorities of power in social situations? Wow, I'm sorry, that's really wordy. How is reality defined so that minorities are robbed of power? We spend a lot of time talking about specific social situations and how those social situations come predefined for you. Now I want you to think, how is it that they are predefined in a way that distributes power unequally? So that's the question. Are you ready? 5 minutes. Start writing. Okay, hopefully you paused it and I'm not talking in the middle of your 5 minutes. But anyway, that is it. So what we've done for this, you've done 3 different free writes. Make sure you save those. We'll be doing some more of that later, but you'll be using them. And then we also defined the 5 features of reality and the dominant symbolic universe and expected storyline. So I'll see you all in class next week. Have a beautiful day.